Welcome to the channel, guys. We are back again for another fragrance battle, and today I'm going to be talking about two heavy-hitting boozy tobacco fragrances, and those are Fan Your Flames and Side Effect. So stay tuned for that. And if you like the content, hit that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. I actually decided to do this video because these are two really amazing popular fragrances in the community. They're both a similar type of fragrance, and that's boozy tobacco with a little bit of sweetness to really simplify and summarize. Although I should say, you put these side by side, no one's going to confuse them for each other. So they're not really the same DNA, but they are the same genre of fragrance. So I thought it would be fun to talk about both of these fragrances and which one comes out on top as the best boozy tobacco fragrance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Initio first. And this is a really great fragrance. So it does open up with this nice sweetness. I find the sweetness to be very powerful in this one and a lot stronger than it is in Fan Your Flames. And actually there's something about the sort of cinnamon and boozy vibe that gives me a little bit of an orange soda pop kind of a feel, which I actually really like. I think it's something about the booziness and the rum and the vanilla that maybe triggers a scent memory. I'm not entirely sure because I did used to drink, I believe it was spiced rum, and Orange Crush. It tasted very good, kind of like an orange creamsicle. And that's actually the kind of vibe that I actually get on this. This is very boozy. Not in the sense that it really smells a lot like rum, but there's something about the booziness that actually creates an almost aquatic effect. So this one almost feels like very liquidy. It doesn't actually come across like fresh or aquatic in that way, but the booziness definitely has this feel to it of being very liquidy. And I think that contrasts Fan Your Flames quite a bit. So this is very sweet in the opening, whereas Fan Your Flames I find is a little bit different, or quite a bit different than this, the way that it actually plays out. So in the opening, I do get a lot more of the tobacco, whereas in the Initio, I don't really get that much of the tobacco. I find there's quite a bit of this sort of dry, almost dry tobacco feel in this one, and it does definitely have tobacco dominant with a light sweetness. Now, having worn this more times, the sweetness that I originally got when I first got this fragrance, I do identify a little bit more as coconut than the first few times that I wore this, and when I actually, I think this was a blind buy, when I did try this one out. So I do actually get the coconut a little bit, which I like as well because it does feel a little bit unique. You have this nice sweet tobacco with a little bit of that coconut vibe in the background. It's not overpowering. The rum as well. This one also has rum. I don't get a huge amount of booziness. Now, it does have a bit of booziness to it, but also subdued, where I think the tobacco is much more prominent in this one. And there is something about this composition which is, it's hard to describe, but to me, it gives me the impression of actually, maybe there's tobacco that actually has embers in it. Now, it's not smoky in that sense, but it's almost like it's burning. So, like, part of it is actually on fire. Again, not in a smoky way, but there's something that just gives me the impression of burning embers. And that's a really cool quality for this fragrance. I do really enjoy it. And so those are basically the differences. You get, at least in the opening, you get a lot more sweetness with Side Effect. It's a lot boozier. Whereas Fan Your Flames, I find that it is a little bit boozy, a little bit sweet, and a lot more of that sort of almost embery tobacco, which is a really nice effect that they managed to create with that one. Now, as this one transitions into the dry down, I do get a little bit more sweetness, but a lot of the same qualities do persist for a good amount of the fragrance. I find this one to be a little bit linear, which is not a bad thing because I do really enjoy the way that it smells. But at least to me, this composition doesn't transform a lot. Some fragrances definitely change over time. This one is not one that does that a lot. That booziness kind of subsides a little bit, and I do find I get a little bit more sweetness, but not too much as this one progresses. And it definitely has a nice tobacco and a little bit of a woody accord in the dry down. But ultimately, what you smell in the opening is more or less what you get in the dry down, but not quite the same. It tones down a little bit. The actual proportions of things change a little bit. But I mean, I was surprised how long that really kind of almost that feeling of burning tobacco lasts a really long time, which I like with this one. There's also a little bit of kind of a piercing or sharp vibe to this, not in an unpleasant way. I feel like it's one that gives it the impression of being a strong fragrance and making a statement. So as that one dries down, that's generally what I get from it. Now with side effect, I do find this one does change over time. That boozy vibe definitely does stick around for a long time. But as this one dries down, it actually changes a little bit more into a more familiar kind of tobacco fragrance. So the tobacco definitely starts to pop out much later in the dry down as being a lot more prominent than anything else. The booziness subsides, the sweetness does tone down a little bit, and it reminds me a little bit of other fragrances where you have in the dry down not quite a chocolatey feel, but there's something about like tobacco and vanilla that gives me this impression, and I get it a little bit from Enigma. I think red tobacco, I also get a little bit of it as well in the dry down, and it's kind of like a very prominent kind of chocolately tobacco. Now this one I find to be much less sort of chocolatey than I get the impression with Enigma. So it is different, but it does have a certain similarity to that kind of feel where the tobacco is very prominent, the booziness is toned down. It's not nearly as sweet. The Orange Crush vibe is most definitely gone. But it is really, really nice, and it's certainly not identical to any of those fragrances. It just has, it's kind of, again, in a similar genre to me as those, where it has a more prominent tobacco with some sweetness. So this one does change a little bit, and that can be nice, especially if you like fragrances that transition, and if you like both of the transitions. Now, I do really enjoy the opening of this one, which thankfully lasts a very long time. This one, I would say, that opening boozy feel definitely lasts 4 or 5 hours, and with respect to performance, you know, both these fragrances are amazing. I'll say that this one, Side Effect, is, in my opinion, the stronger of the two with respect to projection. This one is a louder fragrance, and it is very potent. Now, that's not to say that Fan Your Flames is any slouch. You know, I've heard people talk about or mention, you know, smelling my cologne when I'm out, when I've just put on only 3 sprays from a very long distance away. And so this one performs really well as well. Again, this one has, you know, very strong performance, but I find it's a little bit subtler. Now, it isn't, of course, subtle by any means. I find that it's just not as powerful as this with respect to how much you smell it. But both of them, very, very strong performers. Long-lasting, both of them. Now, this one, honestly, if you count every bit of when you can smell it, I would say it pushes the 12-hour mark for sure. But when it comes to projection, you know, you're looking at 3+ hours. And when it comes to being a little bit more noticeable than a skin scent, you know, that's 8+ hours. But, you know, definitely as you're getting further than that, it's definitely a very, very subtle skin scent. But it is still there. So that's very impressive that it lasts that long. Now, this one, it doesn't last quite as long. So I would put it more in that more towards the 10-hour mark, where this is more towards the 12-hour mark. But this one is probably, as I mentioned, a little bit stronger on the projection. So this one, just a little bit, doesn't project quite as much, isn't quite as voluminous, but it does last longer. So there is that between the two. Now, finally, you know, the occasions that these can be worn. Again, these are both fragrances that would be worn in a similar occasion, which is one reason why I certainly decided to talk about both these fragrances at the same time. Great fall-winter fragrances, both of these. I think heavy hitters, especially in the colder weather. These are both ones that can be worn very, very easily. And I think they suit that a little bit more because, again, they're both good projectors, good longevity, and they are sweet tobacco boozy fragrances. Now, again, They both do have a lot of classiness, so I think these can easily be dressed up to formal occasions. They're nice for nights out. I think they're both very alluring. I do find this one a little bit more masculine. They are both unisex fragrances. I think anyone can really wear easily any of these fragrances, but I find that this one is a little bit less sweet. Does make it come off a little bit more masculine, especially with the tobacco being a little bit more prominent. But that's not to say that this one is feminine, although I know that some people do find this one to be feminine. And in that respect, I can kind of understand where they might say that. It is quite sweet, especially in the opening. And I think when it smells a lot like a Boozy Orange Crush to me, it's very unisex and very, very easy for anyone or a woman to wear as well. And so I think more as you get into the dry down, this does start to become a little bit more masculine. But, you know, if you wanted to think about which one is more masculine overall, I would say this one as opposed to this one. But again, they're both very classy fragrances. I think good for formal occasions, good for nights out, good in the evening. I mean, they're pretty loud, so I personally wouldn't suggest wearing them to the office. I might do that because, again, I just wear whatever I please most of the time. If it suits me or if I feel like wearing it, that's sort of what I wear that day. But it's probably, I mean, it depends on your coworkers too. You don't want to wear something, especially if you're in a cubicle or something, you're very close. These ones are both going to be the kind of thing that are going to be very, very strong. And so I typically would generally avoid that in the office situation. But like I said, great night out fragrance, good for formal occasions. And both these, I think, have the same potential to be the kind of fragrances that would get you noticed or that people would definitely be drawn to. I do find this one a little bit more sensual in the sense that it does have a little bit more sweetness, which makes it a little bit more alluring. But again, I like them both. I'll just say one last thing, presentation. I do really like the dark purple. It's actually one of the things that made me like the Side Effect, the bottle, and Initio as well. It is a very beautiful presentation. My only complaint always about Initio is that any of the bottles that are the same color, which they have a lot that are the same color, you have no idea which one it is without looking at the cap. So that's a little bit annoying, but it's not that big of a deal. It also says it on the bottom, but you know, it kind of bothers me. I wish it was easier to know just by looking at the front. Now, the Nishane presentation, it is fairly straightforward, but I do actually like this style of presentation a lot. I like the brands that do have this type of bottle with a nice plaque on it. And as I mentioned a lot, I love the Nishane cap. I love the new style that they have. It's just a really cool cap. It's also very heavy. The cap is heavier than the entire bottle. Anyways, guys, I'm actually going to close this one off, but I'm going to say for me personally, if I had to pick just one, I would go with Fan Your Flames. Leave a comment down below. What is your favorite out of these two? Why do you like one over the other? Or is there another Boozy tobacco fragrance that you think is better than both of these fragrances? Let me know. Anyways, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.